I stood in the marble lobby of the Grand Maxwell Hotel, my flagship property, watching in stunned silence as security guards changed the locks to my own office. Through the glass doors, I could see my wife Victoria embracing him, Marcus Bennett, our supposed hospitality consultant, as they supervised the removal of my name from the directory. The same man she'd been secretly transferring our hotels to, one property at a time. They hadn't noticed me yet, standing there in the shadows of my own empire's lobby. But they would soon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Because while Victoria thought she had orchestrated the perfect takeover, she had no idea about the offshore account statement sitting in my briefcase, proof of the fortune I'd been quietly securing for exactly this type of betrayal. The morning started like any other at the Grand Maxwell Hotel in downtown Manhattan. The usual symphony of luxury hospitality filled the air, the gentle classical music floating through hidden speakers, the clicking of designer heels on imported Italian marble, the soft murmur of international guests checking in and out. Every detail of the lobby had been personally selected by me 15 years ago, from the hand-carved mahogany reception desk to the crystal chandelier that had once hung in a European palace. This was my life's work, the crown jewel of Maxwell Hotels International, a chain I'd built from a single struggling property into 15 luxury hotels across 3 continents. I just returned from a 3-week inspection tour of our European properties. Victoria had insisted I go personally, claimed some of our highest-paying clients had requested my presence at our Paris and Rome locations. She'd been unusually adamant about the timing, even rescheduling several important board meetings to ensure I'd be away. Now, standing in my own lobby like a stranger, I understood why she'd been so eager to get me out of the country. The first sign something was wrong came from Marco, our longtime head doorman. I'd hired him 20 years ago when this was still the rundown Hamilton Hotel, before I'd transformed it into the 5-star destination it was today. His face, usually bright with a professional smile, fell when he saw me. His weathered features twisted with something that looked like guilt. "Mr. Maxwell, I thought you weren't due back until next week." His eyes darted toward the entrance, and then back to me. Mrs. Maxwell said. He stopped himself, adjusting his gold-braided uniform nervously. "Where is my wife, Marco?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the growing unease in my chest. The same unease I'd felt when Victoria had started having private meetings with our lawyers 3 months ago. He hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with his uniform buttons. In that hesitation, I heard everything he wasn't saying. She's in your office, sir, with Mr. Bennett, Marcus Bennett, the turnaround specialist Victoria had insisted we hire 6 months ago, young, ambitious, with an MBA from Wharton and a reputation for aggressive corporate restructuring. I'd resisted. At first, our hotels were doing exceptionally well, with record occupancy rates and a waiting list for our premium suites. But Victoria had been persuasive, as she always was. "We need fresh eyes," she'd said over dinner at our penthouse, "someone to help us scale even further." I'd trusted her judgment. After all, we'd built this empire together, or so I thought. Took the private elevator to the executive floor, my mind racing through the strange patterns of the past few months. The mysterious board meetings I hadn't been invited to, the sudden transfer of our Marseille property to a new holding company I'd never heard of. Victoria's insistence that I sign papers. Just routine corporate restructuring while I was rushing to catch flights. The way she'd started keeping her phone face down at dinner, the elevator doors opened to chaos. Staff members were hurriedly packing boxes, avoiding my eyes as they scurried past with armfuls of files and personal items. Through the glass walls of my corner office, I saw Victoria perched on my desk, laughing at something Marcus was saying. Her hand rested on his arm with an intimacy that made my blood run cold. She wore the red Valentino dress I'd given her for our anniversary last year, her diamond wedding ring catching the morning light as she gestured animatedly. Then I saw the document on the desk between them, its bold header visible even from where I stood. Notice of immediate dissolution. Maxwell Hotels International. They were liquidating my company, my entire life's work, the empire I'd built from nothing, starting with a mortgage property in a bad neighborhood and a dream of creating something extraordinary. I should have burst in, should have demanded answers, should have reminded them both that I was James Maxwell, the man who'd revolutionized luxury hospitality in 3 countries. But something made me stop. 20 years of business instincts, screaming at me to wait, to observe, to plan. Instead, I turned and walked back to the elevator, my hand clutching the briefcase containing my secret, the offshore account statement that had arrived just yesterday. A backup plan I'd put in place years ago when I first noticed Victoria's fascination with ambitious young executives who reminded me of myself 20 years ago. I retreated to the lobby, finding a shadowed corner near the grand staircase where I'd proposed to Victoria 12 years earlier. From here, I watched as the scene unfolded, security arriving with new locks, maintenance workers carefully removing my name from the directory, staff members exchanging worried glances. Everything we'd built together was being dismantled. In broad daylight, I took out my phone, dialed a number I'd hoped I'd never have to use. It rang twice before a crisp British accent answered. "Mr. Rothschild, it's James Maxwell." I kept my voice low, professional. "Yes, I'm afraid it's time to activate those contingency measures we discussed. All of them." A pause. No waiting period. Immediate effect. I ended the call just as Victoria finally spotted me. Her perfect composure cracked for just a moment. Surprise, then fear, then cold determination crossing her face in rapid succession. She whispered something to Marcus, who straightened his Italian suit and started walking toward me, 2 security guards falling into step behind him. "Mr. Maxwell," he said, all corporate smoothness and practiced authority, "I'm afraid you're no longer authorized to be on these premises. The board has voted—" I held up my hand, silencing him. My voice, when it came, was calmer than I felt. "You might want to hold off on those liquidation papers, Marcus." I patted my briefcase. "There are some accounts in the Cayman Islands you and Victoria really should know about first." Victoria's step faltered. She knew me well enough to recognize when I wasn't bluffing. For a moment, I saw a flash of the woman I'd fallen in love with, sharp, calculating, always able to read the currents of power. Her eyes narrowed slightly, that brilliant mind already racing to understand what she'd missed. But I was already turning away, walking across the lobby I'd designed, past the fountain I'd imported from Florence, under the chandelier that had witnessed countless moments of our shared triumph. Because while they thought they were dissolving my empire, they had no idea that I was about to dissolve their perfectly planned betrayal. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. Long before the Grand Maxwell Hotel became Manhattan's crown, jewel of hospitality, before the 15 properties spanning 3 continents, before Victoria and her perfectly orchestrated betrayal, I was just James Maxwell, the son of a small-town motel manager with big dreams and an old, worn copy of Conrad Hilton's autobiography in my back pocket. I remember the exact moment I fell in love with hotels. I was 10 years old, standing in the lobby of the Plaza during a rare family trip to New York. While other kids dreamed of becoming astronauts or firefighters, I dreamed of crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and the perfect orchestration of luxury service. The way every guest, no matter who they were outside those gilded doors, could feel like royalty, if only for a night. My father ran the Pine Grove Motor Lodge, a 42-room motel off Highway 27 in upstate New York. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It wasn't much. Peeling wallpaper, tired carpets, and a neon sign that flickered more often than it glowed. But it was my first classroom. Every summer from age 12 to 18, I worked every position possible. Bellhop, front desk, maintenance, housekeeping. I learned the business from the ground up, understanding that true luxury wasn't just about expensive furnishings. It was about anticipating needs before they arose. Service is in the details, Jimmy, my father would say, showing me how to properly make hospital corners on bed sheets or the right way to greet a tired traveler. Anyone can build a fancy building, but not everyone can make it feel like home. I worked my way through Cornell's School of Hotel Administration, taking night shifts at local hotels to pay tuition. While other students partied, I studied successful hotel chains, analyzing their business models, their expansion strategies, their failures and successes. I graduated summa cum laude, but more importantly, I graduated with a vision. My first real opportunity came in 1998. The Hamilton Hotel, a once grand property in a declining neighborhood of Manhattan, was up for sale. The building was a mess. Outdated systems, structural issues, a reputation for attracting the wrong kind of clientele. But underneath the decay, I saw the bones of something magnificent. 20-foot ceilings, original Art Deco details, and a location that I knew would become prime real estate once the neighborhood turned around. I scraped together every penny I had, maxed out multiple credit cards, and convinced 3 local investors to take a chance on my vision. The purchase price was $2.8 million, a fortune to me then, but a bargain for Manhattan real estate. I lived in the basement maintenance room for the first year, working 18-hour days, personally overseeing every aspect of the renovation, Marco. Now my head doorman was one of my first hires. I found him working security at a nearby department store. There was something in his eyes, a natural warmth, an instinct for hospitality. "I don't care about your experience," I told him during the interview. "I care about your understanding of service. Tell me, what does luxury mean to you?" His answer showed me he got it. "Luxury isn't about the price tag, Mr. Maxwell. It's about making people feel seen, respected, special, like they matter." The first year was brutal. Construction delays, permit issues, cost overruns that kept me awake at night. I had to sell my car, my watch, even my father's gold cufflinks to make payroll. But slowly, piece by piece, the Hamilton transformed. I replaced the scratched linoleum with Italian marble, the fluorescent lights with crystal chandeliers, the dated furniture with custom pieces designed to my specifications. When we reopened in 2000 as the Maxwell Hotel, the neighborhood was already changing. New restaurants were opening, boutiques were moving in, and suddenly our location wasn't a liability. It was an asset. Within 6 months, we had a waiting list for rooms. Within a year, we were turning a profit. The Wall Street Journal called us Manhattan's best-kept secret. Forbes featured us in their luxury travel guide. But I wasn't satisfied. I had bigger dreams. I'd learned that true wealth in the hotel industry came from ownership, not management. So I leveraged the Maxwell's success to acquire more properties. A struggling boutique hotel in Boston, a foreclosed resort in Miami, a historic property in Chicago that just needed the right vision to become something spectacular. Each acquisition followed the same pattern. Find undervalued properties with good bones, renovate them to my exacting standards, install my management systems, and watch them flourish. By 2005, I had 5 hotels, each one more successful than the last. Maxwell Hotels International was becoming a name in the industry. That's when I met Victoria. She was staying at the Maxwell Chicago, in town for a luxury retail conference. I was there overseeing the final stages of the renovation. The moment. She walked into the lobby, Every head turned. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was stunning in her Chanel suit and perfectly styled blonde hair. It was her presence, the way she carried herself like she owned every room she entered. Later that evening, I found her in the hotel bar, sipping a martini and making notes on a stack of papers. She was a buyer for Bergdorf Goodman, she told me, responsible for selecting their luxury accessories line. We talked for hours about business, about vision, about the art of creating experiences that justified premium prices. "You know what I love about this hotel?" she said, gesturing around the bar with her perfectly manicured hand. "It feels curated, not decorated, like every detail has meaning." I knew then that she understood what I was trying to build. Not just hotels, but sanctuaries of refined taste and impeccable service. We were married 8 months later, and Victoria threw herself into the business with the same passion she brought to everything else. She had an eye for luxury that elevated our properties even further. She redesigned our uniforms, upgraded our amenity lines, and formed partnerships with high-end brands that enhanced our prestige. Together, we expanded aggressively: Paris, Rome, Dubai. Each new property more luxurious than the last. The press loved us. Hospitality's power couple, they called us. Victoria charmed journalists and investors alike, while I focused on operations and expansion. We seemed unstoppable. Our company valuation hit 10 figures. We were invited to all the right parties, featured in all the right magazines. The kid from the Pine Grove Motor Lodge was now running one of the most prestigious hotel chains in the world. If someone had told me then that Victoria would one day try to take it all away, that she would attempt to liquidate everything we'd built together, I wouldn't have believed them. But looking back, there were signs. The way she studied our corporate structure with increasing interest, her careful cultivation of board member relationships, her insistence on being added to every major account and legal document. I was so busy building our empire that I didn't notice she was building something else, a perfect plan to take it all away from me. But I hadn't survived in this business. By being naive, even as I trusted her, I prepared for betrayal. The offshore accounts were my insurance policy, a substantial portion of our profits, carefully channeled through a network of shell companies and foreign banks. Not illegal, but definitely well hidden. Always have a backup plan, my father used to say, in business and in life. As I stand here now, watching security change the locks to my office, I'm grateful for that advice. Victoria thinks she's won, that she and Marcus have orchestrated the perfect takeover. But she's about to learn what every failed hotel owner I've bought out eventually realized: never underestimate James Maxwell. Because while they're celebrating their victory in my office, they don't realize they're about to become an object. Lesson in the most important rule of business: always check the fine print. I first met Marcus Bennett at Le Bernardin on a crisp October evening. Victoria had insisted on this dinner, claiming he was a rising star in the hospitality consulting world. "He's turned around 3 major hotel groups in Europe," she'd said, adjusting my tie in our penthouse before we left. "Everyone's trying to get his attention. We're lucky he agreed to meet us." I should have noticed how she lingered on that last detail, how her fingers trembled slightly as she smoothed my lapels. But I was distracted by our latest acquisition, a troubled luxury resort in Monte Carlo that needed immediate attention. In retrospect, the timing of this dinner wasn't coincidental. Le Bernardin was our usual spot for important meetings, where the maitre d' always kept table 14 ready for us, the corner table with the perfect blend of privacy and prestige. But that night, Victoria had chosen a different table, more centrally located. She wanted us to be seen, I realized later. She was setting a stage. Marcus arrived precisely on time, which I appreciated. His Brioni suit was impeccable, his Patek. Philippe watched quietly, announcing his success without screaming it. He moved through the restaurant with the confidence of someone who belonged in any room he entered. Early 40s, I gauged, but with the kind of polished presence that made age irrelevant. "Mr. Maxwell," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive. "It's an honor to finally meet you. Your transformation of the Hamilton Hotel is literally a case study at Harvard Business School now." I noticed how he'd done his homework, mentioning my first success rather than our more recent, more prestigious properties. It was a subtle touch, acknowledging the foundation rather than the empire. Victoria beamed at this, and I caught a flash of something in her eyes I couldn't quite read. "Please call me James," I said, gesturing for him to sit. "Victoria tells me you've been doing remarkable things in Europe." He smiled modestly, but there was nothing modest about what he said next. "I specialize in unlocking hidden value. The Ritz-Carlton Group in Paris, the Dorchester Collection, they were all underperforming before my team stepped in. We doubled their valuations within 18 months. The waiter appeared with champagne, Dom Perignon already ordered. Victoria had orchestrated every detail of this evening, I realized later. She raised her glass. "To new possibilities," she said, her eyes lingering on Marcus a moment too long. Over the next 3 hours, Marcus laid out his vision for Maxwell Hotels International. He'd clearly studied our operation extensively. He spoke about untapped markets, innovative financing structures, aggressive expansion strategies. His ideas were bold, some might say reckless, but he presented them with such conviction that they seemed inevitable rather than risky. "Your hotels are excellent, James," he said, cutting into his perfectly cooked Wagyu beef. "But they're operating at only 60% of their potential value. The market is shifting. Luxury isn't enough anymore. You need to create experiential ecosystems." Victoria leaned forward, entirely engaged. "Tell him about what you did with the Ritz-Carlton Group's asset structure," she prompted, and I noticed she'd barely touched her sea base. Marcus launched into an explanation of complex financial mechanisms, holding companies, asset segregation, strategic debt placement. It was innovative, I had to admit, if somewhat aggressive. "The key," he said, "is to create a more fluid corporate structure, one that can adapt quickly to market opportunities. Your current model is too traditional." The way he said traditional, like it was a polite synonym for outdated, should have been my first warning. But Victoria's enthusiasm was infectious. She'd clearly been discussing these ideas with him before our dinner. "James," she said, touching my hand in that way she had when she really wanted something, "Marcus has turned down 3 major hotel groups to meet with us. He sees what we've built, what it could become." I studied him over my wine glass. "And what exactly are you proposing, Marcus?" "A 6-month consultation period," he said smoothly. "Let me show you what I can do with just one property. If you're not impressed, we shake hands and part ways. If you are," he smiled, "well, then we can discuss a more permanent arrangement." "Which property did you have in mind?" I asked, though. Somehow I already knew the answer. "The Monte Carlo Resort," Victoria interjected quickly. "It's perfect timing with the renovation planning already underway." "Of course. Our newest acquisition, the one property I was most concerned about. The one that needed immediate attention. The one that, if mishandled, could cause significant problems for our entire group." Marcus pulled out a slim leather portfolio, producing a preliminary proposal. The terms were surprisingly favorable, almost too favorable. His consulting fee was well below market rate, with most of his compensation tied to performance metrics. "I believe in putting my money where my mouth is," he said, noting my raised eyebrow at the terms. "If I don't deliver results, I don't expect to be paid." Victoria touched my arm again. "It's exactly what we need right now, darling. With the Monte Carlo property requiring so much attention and the new Dubai project breaking ground," I looked between them, my brilliant wife, and this smooth consultant with his Harvard MBA and his impressive track record. They made a compelling case, I had to admit. And with our rapid expansion, having someone focused solely on optimizing our operations had merit. "Let me review the proposal in detail," I said finally. "We can discuss it further next week." Marcus nodded graciously, but I caught the quick glance he exchanged with Victoria. They'd expected immediate agreement, I realized later. This minor delay wasn't part of their script. After dinner, in our car heading home, Victoria was unusually quiet. "What did you think?" she finally asked, trying to sound casual. "He's very impressive," I admitted. "Almost too impressive." She turned to me, her face serious in the passing streetlights. "We need someone like him, James. The industry is changing. If we don't adapt—" "I know," I said, squeezing her hand. "Let me just do my due diligence." She nodded, but her hand was cold in mine. I should have recognized it then. The slight tension in her shoulders, the way she withdrew into herself. My wife was already pulling away, and I was too blind to see it. The next week, after thoroughly checking Marcus's references and track record, I agreed to the consultation arrangement. The contract was signed in our boardroom. Champagne was poured. Photos were taken for the industry press. "Maxwell Hotels International brings in rising star consultant," the headlines read. Victoria arranged a celebratory dinner at our penthouse that evening. As I watched her and Marcus discussing future plans, their heads close together over proposed workflows, I felt a momentary unease, but I dismissed it. After all, this was business. This was about taking our company to the next level. I didn't realize then that I'd just invited the architect of my own downfall into my empire. I didn't know that while Marcus was restructuring our Monte Carlo property, he and Victoria were restructuring something else entirely, a plan to take everything from me. The perfect deception was just beginning, and I had signed the papers. That set it in motion. The first 6 months after bringing Marcus Bennett into Maxwell Hotels International were intoxicating. The Monte Carlo property, which I'd feared might become our first major failure, transformed under his guidance. He delivered everything he'd promised and more. Our occupancy rates shot up to 95%, our revenue per available room doubled, and the local press dubbed us the Riviera's new crown jewel. Victoria was radiant with vindication. "See," she'd say, showing me the latest financial reports, "this is exactly what we needed." She threw herself into working with Marcus, spending long hours strategizing over property optimizations and market positioning. I was grateful for her dedication, blind to the other reasons for her late nights at the office. Marcus's success with Monte Carlo earned him an expanded role. Soon, he was overseeing operations for all our European properties. His methods were aggressive but effective. He streamlined our management structure, introduced innovative booking systems, and established partnerships with luxury brands that transformed our hotels into lifestyle destinations. Our Paris location began hosting Fashion Week events. The Rome property became the preferred venue for international film festivals. Every hotel in our portfolio was elevated from mere luxury accommodation to a cultural landmark. The press couldn't get enough of us. Maxwell Hotels, the new standard. In global luxury, Forbes declared. Business Week put us on their cover. How one couple built a billion-dollar hotel empire. The irony of that headline haunts me now. We expanded rapidly during this period, adding 7 new properties in 18 months. Each acquisition was bigger than the last. When we purchased the historic Grand Palace Hotel in Vienna, the signing ceremony made international news. Victoria wore a burgundy Valentino dress that day, standing between Marcus and me as cameras flashed. The three of us raised champagne glasses, toasting our success. I didn't notice then how her shoulder brushed against his, how their smiles held private meanings. Our personal life seemed perfect too. Victoria and I bought a second home in the south of France, a villa overlooking the Mediterranean. We hosted legendary parties there, entertaining celebrities, royalty, and business titans. Marcus was always invited, of course. "He's family now," Victoria would say, and I agreed. He had helped us achieve things I'd only dreamed of. The numbers were staggering. Our company valuation passed $2 billion. We were fielding calls from sovereign wealth funds wanting to invest. Investment banks courted us with talks of going public. Every morning brought new opportunities, new possibilities for expansion. Remember one particular evening at our New York penthouse. We'd just closed the Dubai deal, 3 ultra-luxury properties that would redefine Middle Eastern hospitality. Victoria had organized an intimate dinner celebration. Just the 3 of us, she insisted, family only. "To the future," Marcus toasted, raising his glass of 1982 Lafite Rothschild. He'd brought the bottle, knowing it was my favorite. "To the dreams we're building together." Victoria was wearing the diamond necklace I'd given her for our 10th anniversary, her skin glowing in the candlelight. "We're unstoppable now," she said, her eyes bright with something I mistook for shared ambition. We stayed up late that night, planning our next moves. Marcus had ideas for Asia, Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo. Victoria suggested private branded residences attached to our hotels. The energy was electric. 3 minds working in perfect synchronization, or so I thought. I was particularly proud of our staff retention during this period. Unlike many rapidly expanding companies, we kept our key people. Marco, my trusted doorman from the early days, was now our global head of guest relations. Sarah Chen, who'd started as a junior accountant, ran our entire financial operation. They were loyal, dedicated, part of the Maxwell family. Victoria took a special interest in our corporate structure during this time. She spent hours with our lawyers, reviewing holding companies, subsidiary relationships, voting rights. "We need to protect what we've built," she'd say, when I questioned the complexity of these arrangements. Marcus showed me how vulnerable we are without proper structures in place. I trusted her completely. After all, she'd been beside me through everything. From our first property to our global empire, she'd been my partner, my confidant, my inspiration. When she suggested consolidating our ownership structures for tax efficiency, I signed the papers without hesitation. Marcus became a fixture in our lives. He had an apartment in the same building as our penthouse. Victoria's suggestion to make late-night strategy sessions more convenient. He joined us for holidays, accompanied us on private yacht trips, became godfather to our friends' children. He was charming, brilliant, and completely trusted. The press loved the 3 of us together. Hospitality's Holy Trinity, they called us. Victoria was always in the middle in photos, her perfect smile bridging the gap between my operational expertise and Marcus's financial wizardry. We were the subject of business school case studies, industry conference keynotes, magazine profiles. Looking back, I can see how perfectly they played their parts. Marcus, the devoted friend and brilliant strategist, always deferential to me. In public, always supporting my vision while quietly undermining it. Victoria, the loving wife and savvy businesswoman, balancing between us while orchestrating our downfall. The warning signs were there, but success has a way of blinding you. When Victoria insisted on separate legal counsel for our personal assets, I agreed. It seemed prudent given our growth. When Marcus suggested restructuring our board of directors, adding his chosen members, I supported it. His other recommendations had been so profitable. Our success peaked with the opening of our Dubai properties. 3 simultaneous launch events, each more spectacular than the last. Kings and princes attended. Victoria outshone them all, working the crowds with effortless grace. Marcus stayed in the background, humble, efficient, watching. Always watching. That night in our royal suite at the Maxwell Dubai Palm, Victoria kissed me with what felt like genuine passion. "We did it," she whispered. "Everything we dreamed of." I held her close, feeling on top of the world. Our company was worth nearly $3 billion. We had 22 properties across 4 continents. Every major financial publication hailed us as visionaries. I didn't know then that it was the last real kiss we'd share. I didn't realize that success wasn't bringing us closer. It was giving them cover for what would come next. While I was celebrating our achievements, they were finalizing their betrayal. The golden years were ending. The long con was about to begin. They say hindsight is 20/20. Looking back now, the signs of betrayal were as clear as the crystal chandeliers in our hotel lobbies. But success has a way of clouding your vision, of making you dismiss the small inconsistencies that don't fit your perfect narrative. The first real crack appeared during the preparations for our Tokyo hotel launch. Victoria had always been meticulous about our expansion strategies, but this time was different. She and Marcus insisted on using a new holding company structure, something far more complex than our usual arrangements. It's about tax efficiency, Marcus explained one evening in our New York office, spreading documents across my mahogany desk. The Japanese market has unique requirements. This structure will save us millions. I studied the papers, noting how the ownership flowcharts resembled a spider's web more than a corporate structure. This seems unnecessarily complicated, I said, tapping my finger on a particularly convoluted series of shell companies. Victoria, who had been unusually quiet during the presentation, stepped forward. James, darling, you know how conservative Asian investors are. This is standard practice there. Her hand rested on my shoulder, but it felt lighter than usual, almost hesitant. What I didn't know then was that this tax efficiency structure was actually the first step in their plan. Each new holding company, each subsidiary, each special purpose vehicle, they were all designed to gradually separate me from my own empire. The changes came slowly at first. Board meetings were rescheduled at the last minute to times when I was traveling. Key decisions were made in emergency sessions I couldn't attend. Victoria began handling more of our legal documentation, always with a perfectly reasonable explanation. "You're so busy with operations, darling," she'd say, sliding another document across my desk for signing. "Let me handle the administrative details." Then came the staff changes. Loyal employees who had been with us for years were gradually replaced or transferred to distant properties. Sarah Chen, our brilliant CFO, who had been with us since the early days, was suddenly offered a promotion to oversee our Asia-Pacific operations, effectively removing her from our corporate headquarters. "It's a fantastic opportunity for her," Marcus insisted. "She'll have full autonomy over the region." But Sarah came to me privately before accepting the position. "Mr. Maxwell," she said, her voice low in my office after hours, "something doesn't feel right. The financial structures they're creating, they're much more complex than necessary." I dismissed her concerns, convinced that Victoria and Marcus knew what they were doing. After all, our profits were higher than ever. Our expansion was continuing at a record pace. Success has a way of making you ignore the warning signs. The next red flag came during our annual executive retreat in the Maldives. Traditionally, these meetings were a time for our entire senior team to align on strategy and celebrate our successes. But this year was different. Victoria had changed the guest list, limiting it to a select group, mostly new executives who had been hired on Marcus's recommendation. "We need to keep it intimate this year," she explained, "more focused." I watched from our overwater villa as she and Marcus spent hours in what they called strategic planning sessions on the beach. Their heads close together, documents spread out between them. They looked more like conspirators than colleagues. During formal meetings, I began noticing a pattern. Any proposal I made was met with polite interest, but was ultimately redirected. Meanwhile, Marcus's suggestions were enthusiastically supported by the new board members. It was subtle, but unmistakable. I was being marginalized in my own company. The media coverage started shifting too. Articles that had once celebrated the Maxwell empire began featuring Marcus more prominently. "The new face of luxury hospitality," one headline declared, featuring a photo of him standing in our Dubai property. Victoria handled all press interactions now, carefully crafting our public image. Even our hotel staff began treating me differently. There was still respect, of course, but it was tinged with something else. Uncertainty, perhaps even pity. They knew something I didn't want to admit. One evening, I overheard two managers at our London property discussing upcoming changes. Mr. Bennett's new policies, they called them, not Mr. Maxwell's. They quickly fell silent when they noticed me, their faces showing that peculiar mix of respect and discomfort I was becoming all too familiar with. The personal changes were harder to ignore. Victoria's late-night strategy sessions with Marcus became more frequent. She changed her perfume, started dressing differently, subtle changes that only a husband would notice. When I asked about her plans for our anniversary, she was vague, distracted. "Let's keep it simple this year," she said, not looking up from her phone. "I have that board presentation the next day." The board presentation I hadn't been informed about. Even our home life showed signs of the coming storm. Victoria redecorated our penthouse, replacing our shared photographs with abstract art. My office, once my private sanctuary, was gradually transformed into a shared workspace. My personal items disappeared one by one, replaced by generic corporate awards and impersonal decor. Marco, my loyal doorman turned global head of guest relations, tried to warn me in his own way. "Mr. Maxwell," he said one evening as I was leaving the hotel, "sometimes the best way to protect something is to see it clearly for what it is." I didn't understand his meaning then. Or perhaps I didn't want to. The final warning came from my old friend Robert Sterling, a veteran hotelier who had mentored me in my early days. Over lunch at the Four Seasons, he leaned across the table, his face grave. "James," he said, "I'm hearing things about restructuring, about new ownership arrangements. Are you sure you know everything that's happening in your company?" I defended Victoria and Marcus, listing their achievements, our growth, our success. But even as I spoke, I felt the first real stirring of doubt. That night, I stayed late at the office, really looking at our corporate structure for the first time in months. What I found sent a chill down my spine. Subsidiary after subsidiary had been restructured, ownership had been diluted through complex holding companies, voting rights had been quietly redistributed. On paper, I was still the founder and CEO of Maxwell Hotels International. But the real control, the actual ownership, had been gradually, legally and systematically transferred elsewhere. I sat there until dawn, surrounded by financial reports and legal documents, finally seeing what everyone else had already noticed. The empire I had built was slowly being pulled out from under me. The question was, what was I going to do about it? Power doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes slowly, like waves wearing away at a cliff, until one day you look down and realize the ground beneath your feet isn't as solid as you thought. That's how they did it. Victoria and Marcus, not with a sudden coup, but with 1,000 tiny cuts to my authority. The systematic undermining of my position became clearer with each passing week. Board meetings transformed into carefully orchestrated performances where my input was noted, discussed, and politely dismissed. Victoria would touch my hand sympathetically while supporting Marcus's counter-proposals. "Darling, perhaps Marcus has a point about modernizing our approach." The Monte Carlo property became their testing ground. First, they restructured the management team, bringing in their own people, all highly qualified professionals with impressive resumes and absolutely no loyalty to me. Then came the operational changes, each one shifting more control away from our traditional corporate structure, my structure, and into their new framework. "It's about agility," Marcus would explain, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. The market demands faster responses than traditional hierarchies allow. He had a way of making radical changes sound inevitable, necessary, almost boring in their obviousness. Victoria backed every move. "James, you built an incredible foundation," she'd say, her voice carrying that new edge of condescension that had crept in over the past months. "But for the company to grow, we need to evolve." Evolve. That was their favorite word. Everything needed to evolve. Our management structure, our ownership model, our brand identity. Even my role as founder was being evolved into something more ceremonial. The changes in our New York headquarters were subtle but significant. My executive assistant was promoted to a different department, replaced by someone from Marcus's team. My access to certain financial systems required new authorizations. Small operational decisions that had once been routine now needed board approval. "Just regulatory compliance," Victoria explained when I questioned the new procedures. "The company's too big now for informal management styles." Even the hotel staff's behavior shifted. Long-time employees who had once reported directly to me now routed everything through Marcus's office. In their eyes, I saw a growing uncertainty about where the real power lay. I remember one particular morning that crystallized everything. I arrived at our flagship property to find the executive. Lounge had been redesigned overnight. My usual corner office, the one I'd personally designed with its view of Central Park, had been converted into a collaborative workspace. "Oh, didn't Victoria mention it?" Marcus asked innocently when I confronted him. "The board approved the changes last week. We're implementing this across all properties. It's part of our new corporate identity initiative. The board meeting I hadn't been invited to. The changes I hadn't been consulted on. In my own hotel, Victoria found me later. That day, staring out the window of what had been my office. "James, darling, you're taking this too personally," she said, her hand light on my shoulder. "It's just business. We need to present a more modern image." But it wasn't just business. It was a calculated campaign to erase my presence, my influence, my very identity from the company I'd built. The media narrative shifted too. Articles about Maxwell Hotels International stopped referring to me as the visionary founder. Instead, I became James Maxwell, who founded the original hotel, while Marcus was quoted extensively about the company's future direction. Victoria was portrayed as the bridge between old and new, the elegant, sophisticated face of a company in transition. They were rewriting history in real time. The story of how I'd built this empire from nothing, mortgaged everything I owned to buy that first struggling property, worked 18-hour days to transform it. All of that was being quietly archived, replaced by a new narrative about corporate evolution and modern leadership. Even our investor presentations changed, the ones I wasn't invited to give anymore. Gone were the slides about our founding principles, our commitment to personalized luxury, our hands-on management philosophy. Instead, Marcus presented sleek decks about digital transformation, asset optimization, and strategic repositioning. The human touch that had built our brand was being systematically stripped away, replaced by corporate buzzwords and algorithmic efficiency. Our hotels were no longer homes away from home. They were luxury assets in a portfolio optimization strategy. The staff felt it too. Marco, who had known me since the beginning, tried to warn me in his subtle way. "Mr. Maxwell," he said one evening, "sometimes the people closest to us cast the longest shadows." I should have seen it then, should have noticed how Victoria had been methodically consolidating her position, building alliances with board members, cultivating relationships with key investors. While I was focused on maintaining our standards of excellence, she and Marcus were reconstructing the entire power structure of the company. The legal documents started arriving with increasing frequency. Complex corporate restructuring papers, new operating agreements, revised board protocols. Victoria would present them casually, usually when I was rushing between meetings. "Just routine updates," she'd say, manicured finger pointing to signature lines. "Nothing to worry about." Each document, I later realized, was another piece of their puzzle, gradually transferring real control away from me while maintaining the appearance of my authority. They were masters of corporate sleight of hand, making power disappear while everyone watched. The final piece clicked into place during a board meeting I was actually allowed to attend. They presented a new, streamlined decision-making process that effectively required Marcus's approval for any significant operational changes. Victoria supported it enthusiastically. Other board members nodded along. And just like that, my ability to run my own company was formally curtailed. I sat there, watching my empire slip through my fingers like sand, wondering how I'd let it happen. The answer was simple. I'd trusted the wrong people. I'd believed in loyalty, in partnership, in the bonds of marriage and friendship. But as I looked across the boardroom table at Victoria and Marcus, I saw something I'd been blind to before. They weren't just colleagues who'd grown too ambitious. They weren't just opportunists making a power play. They were architects of a perfect corporate coup, and they'd just succeeded in taking everything from me, or so they thought. Because while they'd been busy dismantling my authority, transferring power and rewriting history, they'd overlooked one crucial detail. I hadn't survived in this business for 20 years by being naive. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one you think you've already beaten. That morning in the Monte Carlo property changed everything. I had flown in for what I thought was a routine property inspection, only to find myself effectively locked out of my own hotel's executive areas. "I'm sorry, Mr. Maxwell," the new security guard said, not meeting my eyes. "Your access has been temporarily suspended. Protocol updates, protocol updates." The same excuse they'd been using to systematically strip away my authority piece by piece. But this was different. This was blatant. This was war. I stood in the marble lobby I had personally designed, watching as staff members, many of whom I had hired myself, hurried past, avoiding eye contact. Through the glass walls of the executive conference room, I could see Victoria and Marcus leading what appeared to be a board meeting I hadn't been informed about, alone invited to. My phone buzzed. A message from Sarah Chen, our former CFO, who had been conveniently promoted to our Asia operations. "Check your email. Urgent." The attached documents confirmed my worst fears. Hidden beneath layers of corporate jargon and legal complexity was the truth. They were preparing to vote me out completely. The board meeting happening right now wasn't just any meeting. It was the culmination of their plan. Victoria had done her homework. Over the past year, she had methodically replaced board members with her own choices. The complex corporate restructuring, the new holding companies, the revised voting procedures, it had all been leading to this moment. I watched through the glass as she stood at the head of the table, elegant in a black Chanel suit, gesturing confidently as she presented what I now knew was my own execution order. Marcus sat at her right hand, nodding supportively, occasionally adding his own comments. The perfect power couple, preparing to seize control of my life's work. The betrayal hit me in waves. Each detail I remembered now took on new meaning. The way Victoria had insisted I fly to Monte Carlo alone. "You should personally oversee the renovation plans, darling. The recent changes to our corporate banking arrangements, the subtle isolation from our major investors." My phone buzzed again. Robert Sterling, my old mentor. "James, are you in Monte Carlo? Get out, now. They're moving faster than we thought." I stepped back into the shadows of the lobby as the board meeting ended. Directors filed out, some looking uncomfortable, others purposeful. None of them looked in my direction. Through the glass, I could see Victoria and Marcus lingering behind, sharing a moment of triumph. That's when I made my decision. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of witnessing my downfall. I wouldn't play the part they had scripted for me. The outdated founder, gracefully stepping aside for the good of the company, I turned and walked out of the hotel, past the fountains I had commissioned, under the archway I had restored. As my driver pulled away from the property, I made 3 calls. The first was to my private banker in Geneva. "Execute Protocol Nightingale," I said simply. We had established this contingency years ago, a series of financial moves that would protect my core assets in case of exactly this type of corporate takeover attempt. The second call was to a number I had hoped never to use. "Mr. Rothschild? It's time to activate the offshore structure." Another backup plan, carefully prepared but never deployed until now. The third call was to Marco back in New York. "Watch everything," I instructed. "Record everything, but don't let them know you're loyal to me." My phone started ringing immediately after. Victoria, then Marcus, then various board members. I ignored them all. Let them wonder. Let them worry. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect coup, but they had forgotten one crucial detail. I had built this empire from nothing once before. I could do it again. Back in my Monte Carlo hotel suite, not at our property, but at a competitor's, I opened my laptop and began implementing the contingency plans I had quietly put in place over the years. Victoria and Marcus had been so focused on their complex corporate takeover that they hadn't noticed the simplest things, like the fact that certain key intellectual property rights were still registered to my personal holding companies. The next few hours were a blur of encrypted emails, private banking transactions, and carefully worded instructions to trusted allies. Victoria called 17 times. I watched each call go to voicemail, imagining her growing panic as she realized I wasn't going to play my assigned role in her drama. Around midnight, my hotel room phone rang, the only number that could reach me. It was Sarah Chen. "They've done it," she said without preamble. "The board voted an hour ago. They're announcing tomorrow that you're stepping down for personal reasons. Victoria will be named executive chairwoman with Marcus as CEO. I thanked her for the information and hung up. Standing at the window, looking out over the Mediterranean, I felt strangely calm. They thought this was the end. They thought they had won, but they had made a fatal mistake. They had been so careful in their corporate maneuvering, so precise in their legal strategy, that they had forgotten to look for the simplest solutions. They had forgotten that sometimes the most powerful weapons are the ones hidden in plain sight. My phone buzzed one final time that night, a message from Victoria. "James, please be reasonable. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be. Sign the resignation papers. Take the settlement. Don't destroy everything we built." I looked at her message for a long moment, thinking about the irony of her words. Don't destroy everything we built. As if she hadn't already done exactly that. I typed a response, then deleted it. No, they didn't deserve a warning. They didn't deserve to know what was coming. Let them have their moment of triumph. Let them celebrate their perfect coup. Because while they were toasting their victory in Monte Carlo, they had no idea that in a quiet bank office in Geneva, in a law firm in London, and in a private office in the Cayman Islands, the wheels were already in motion. They thought they had taken everything from me. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The real war was just beginning. The first rule of building an empire is to always have a contingency plan. I learned this lesson early. In my career, watching other hoteliers lose everything to bad partnerships or bitter divorces. That's why, even as Victoria and I celebrated our successes, even as we expanded across continents, I was quietly building my fortress. The Cayman Islands account was just the beginning. Over the years, I had constructed a labyrinth of financial safeguards so complex that even our top accountants never fully grasped its scope. Each new hotel acquisition, each property renovation, each major transaction, I made sure a small but significant portion went into my private insurance policy. Sitting in my suite at the Ritz-Carlton Monte Carlo, the irony of staying at a competitor's property wasn't lost on me. I began activating these long-dormant protections. First, I called Julius Rothschild, my private banker in Geneva. The Hydra Protocol, I said simply. Execute all phases. There was a pause on the line. Are you certain, Mr. Maxwell? Once initiated, it cannot be reversed. Do it. The Hydra Protocol was something we had designed 5 years ago, after I first noticed Victoria's growing fascination with Marcus. It was a series of synchronized financial maneuvers across multiple jurisdictions, designed to protect my core assets in case of exactly this type of corporate takeover. While Victoria and Marcus had been busy restructuring the visible parts of Maxwell Hotels International, they had overlooked the invisible foundation I had built beneath it. The real estate holdings registered to private trusts, the intellectual property rights held by offshore entities, the management contracts signed with shell companies that, through a maze of legal arrangements, led back to me. My next call was to Maurice Dupont, a discreet but brilliant lawyer in Luxembourg. Open the sealed documents, I instructed. All of them. These documents were my masterstroke. Years ago, when we were expanding into Europe, I had insisted on using a particular law firm for some seemingly routine paperwork. Victoria, focused on the bigger corporate restructuring, hadn't paid attention to these minor details, but those papers contained carefully worded clauses that would prove devastating to their plans. My phone buzzed constantly. Victoria, Marcus, board members, lawyers. I ignored them all, focusing instead on orchestrating my counterattack. Each call I made triggered another piece of my hidden defense system. By midnight, the first phase was complete. In Geneva, billions in assets had been quietly transferred to protected accounts. In Luxembourg, sealed documents were being processed that would challenge the legality of their entire takeover. In the Cayman Islands, ownership structures were being reversed faster than their lawyers could track. Sarah Chen called around 2 a.m. "Something's happening," she said. "The banking system is locked down. No one can access the main accounts." I smiled. That would be the first effect of the Hydra Protocol, a complete freeze on all major financial transactions. Victoria and Marcus would wake up to find themselves in control of a company they couldn't actually operate. But the real surprise was still to come. While they had been focused on taking control of Maxwell Hotels International, they had missed something crucial: the individual property management contracts. Each hotel in our chain operated under a management agreement with a seemingly independent company. Companies that, through a series of complex legal arrangements, I personally controlled. I opened my laptop and began drafting a memo to be sent to every property general manager in our chain. The message was simple, effective immediately. All operational decisions required approval from the management companies. Companies that, as of tonight, no longer recognized the authority of the board of directors. Victoria had always dismissed the operational side of the business as tedious details, preferring to focus on the glamorous aspects of our empire. That blindness would now prove costly, because while she and Marcus had successfully taken control of the corporate entity, I still controlled the actual mechanism that made the hotels run. Around 3 a.m., my phone lit up with a text from Victoria. "What have you done? The banks are calling. Marcus can't access any accounts. Stop this madness now." I didn't respond. Instead, I sent another set of instructions to my team in the Cayman Islands. By morning, the true ownership of key assets would be revealed, and their perfect coup would begin to unravel. Dawn was breaking over Monte Carlo when Robert Sterling called. "It's working," he said. "They're panicking. Victoria's lawyers have been trying to trace the ownership chains all night. They've finally realized how deep this goes. I walked to the window, watching the sun rise over the Mediterranean. In a few hours, Victoria and Marcus would discover the full extent of their miscalculation. They would learn that while they had been busy stealing my company, I had been busy protecting it in ways they never imagined. The next call came from an unexpected source. Marco, my loyal doorman turned global head of guest relations. "Mr. Maxwell," he said, his voice low, "Mrs. Maxwell is in the New York lobby right now, trying to convince the staff to ignore any operational directives that don't come from her. But the management company paperwork you had us sign last year, it's legally binding, isn't it?" "Yes, Marco, it is." "Oh, it?" I smiled, remembering how I had personally ensured every property had signed those agreements. Just keep watching and recording. By noon, the full impact of my countermeasures would begin to hit. They had taken my company, yes, but I had made sure they would find themselves in control of an empty shell, a corporate entity with no access to its bank accounts, no authority over its properties, and no legal right to the assets they thought they had seized. Victoria and Marcus had orchestrated what they thought was a perfect corporate takeover. But they were about to learn that in their focus on the visible empire, they had completely missed the invisible one I had built beneath it. The war wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. And this time, I wouldn't be fighting to save my company, I would be fighting to take everything back. The morning after I activated the Hydra protocol, chaos erupted across the Maxwell Hotel's empire. I watched it unfold from my suite at the Ritz-Carlton Monte Carlo, each panicked phone call and desperate email confirming that my countermeasures were working exactly as planned. It started with the banking freeze. Victoria and Marcus arrived at their offices to find every major corporate account locked, not just frozen, completely inaccessible. The complex network of offshore accounts and holding companies I'd established over the years had created a financial maze that even their top lawyers couldn't navigate. "Sir," my private banker in Geneva reported, "Mrs. Maxwell has made 17 attempts to access the primary accounts. Her authorization codes are being systematically rejected." The beautiful irony was that everything was completely legal. While they had focused on their corporate takeover, I had spent years building a parallel financial structure that was virtually impenetrable. Every transaction, every transfer, every legal document had been meticulously crafted to withstand exactly this type of challenge. By mid-morning, the impact had spread to hotel operations. General managers across our properties were receiving conflicting instructions, official directives, from Victoria and Marcus versus management company orders that legally superseded board authority. The resulting confusion brought operations to a standstill. Sarah Chen called from Singapore. "The Asian properties are in limbo," she reported. "Victoria's trying to force through operational changes, but the management companies you control are blocking everything. She's threatening legal action." "Let her try," I replied. "Have your team ready with those documents we prepared." Those documents were another piece of my strategy, years of seemingly routine paperwork that, when presented together, would reveal the true ownership structure of our Asian properties. Victoria and Marcus thought they controlled these hotels through their board takeover. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Marco's updates from New York painted a vivid picture of Victoria's growing desperation. She had stormed through the flagship property, trying to assert authority that no longer existed. "She threw a Waterford crystal vase across the lobby," he reported. "The guests saw everything." Around noon, Marcus finally tried to reach me directly. His voicemail was a masterpiece of controlled panic. "James, we need to talk. There are ways to resolve this that benefit everyone. Call me back immediately." I didn't call back. Instead, I initiated phase 2 of my counterattack. One by one, our luxury brand partners began receiving notifications that their contracts with Maxwell Hotels International were under review. These partnerships, worth millions in revenue, had been structured through separate companies that I personally controlled. Victoria had always dismissed these deals as marketing details. Now she was learning that these details were the lifeblood of our luxury positioning. Without them, our hotels would lose the high-end amenities and exclusive privileges that justified our premium rates. The real estate holdings were next. Through a series of complex trust arrangements, the actual ownership of key properties was separated from the operating company. Victoria and Marcus had seized control of Maxwell Hotels International, but they were about to discover they controlled a company that didn't actually own its most valuable assets. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "What have you done with the property deeds? Our lawyers can't trace the ownership chains. Stop this insanity now." I smiled, remembering how she had once mocked my paranoid insistence on complex ownership structures. "It's unnecessarily complicated," she had said. "No one's going to steal your hotels, darling." By late afternoon, the financial markets had caught wind of the situation. Our company's stock, which Victoria and Marcus had planned to leverage for their next phase of expansion, began to drop as rumors of leadership turmoil spread. Robert Sterling called with an update from industry contacts. "They're trying to calm major investors, but it's not working. No one knows who actually controls what anymore. The uncertainty is killing market confidence." That was exactly what I had planned, while they scrambled to assert control over a company that was rapidly becoming worthless. I was preparing to reveal my final card, the offshore accounts that would prove just how much of our empire's wealth I had managed to protect. Around sunset, I received an unexpected call from Maurice Dupont, my lawyer in Luxembourg. "The sealed documents have been processed," he reported. "The ownership challenges can be filed whenever you're ready. These documents were my masterstroke. They would prove that key aspects of their takeover were legally questionable, potentially invalidating the entire board vote. But I wasn't ready to deploy them yet. Sometimes the threat of a weapon is more powerful than its actual use. As night fell over Monte Carlo, I stood on my hotel balcony, watching the lights come on across the harbor. Somewhere in our property on the other side of the city, Victoria and Marcus were probably huddled with their lawyers, trying to understand how their perfect coup had unraveled so completely. They had been so focused on the visible parts of our empire, the board seats, the corporate structure, the public face of power. They had forgotten that real power often lies in the invisible foundations, in the quiet legal agreements and hidden financial structures that actually control how things work. My phone buzzed one final time that night, a message from Victoria. "Whatever you want, we can negotiate. Just stop this before you destroy everything." I thought about responding, about telling her that she had already destroyed everything that mattered: trust, loyalty, love. But instead, I simply turned off my phone and went to bed, because tomorrow Phase 3 would begin. And that's when they would learn the true cost of betraying James Maxwell. The next phase of my counterattack struck at the heart of what Victoria valued most, her carefully crafted public image. By dawn, every major financial publication had received an anonymous but meticulously documented dossier detailing the attempted hostile takeover of Maxwell Hotels International. The story was impossible to ignore. Beloved hospitality pioneer betrayed by wife and trusted advisor. Hotel empire in crisis, Maxwell Hotels International faces leadership turmoil, the Wall Street Journal headline blared. Sources reveal attempted corporate coup by founder's wife and consultant. Bloomberg, Reuters, and Financial Times followed, with their own versions, each more damaging than the last. Victoria had always been obsessed with public perception. She'd spent years cultivating her image as the sophisticated, brilliant half of hospitality's power couple. Now that carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time, The shareholders are panicking, Sarah Chen reported from Singapore. Our stock has dropped 30% since the market opened. Trading might be suspended if this continues. But the stock price was just the beginning. The real damage came from the exodus of luxury partners. Gucci, Hermès, Louis Vuitton. One by one, our high-end brand collaborators began reviewing their relationships with Maxwell Hotels. These partnerships, which Victoria had personally negotiated, were the cornerstone of our ultra-luxury positioning. By mid-morning, my phone was flooded with messages from board members trying to distance themselves from the coup. I was misled about the nature of the restructuring, one wrote. We were told you had agreed to step back gradually. Marco's updates from New York painted a picture of total chaos. Victoria had arrived at the flagship property in a fury, demanding access to files and systems that were now beyond her reach. She tried to override the management company's authority, he reported. Security had to escort her out. There were witnesses, many witnesses. The scene was repeated across our properties worldwide. General managers, faced with conflicting directives, sided with the management companies I controlled. After all, their contracts and paychecks came through these entities, not the corporate shell Victoria and Marcus had seized. Around noon, Marcus made his final attempt at damage control. He called an emergency press conference at our Monte Carlo property. I watched the live stream as he tried to project confidence, explaining that the company was simply evolving its leadership structure. But the reporters had blood in the water. Is it true that Mr. Maxwell still controls the hotel management contracts? Can you explain why major luxury brands are suspending their partnerships? Sources say Mrs. Maxwell's relationship with you predated the corporate takeover attempt. Any comment? Marcus fled the podium after 10 minutes, his carefully maintained composure shattered. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. You've destroyed everything. Are you happy now? I didn't respond. Instead, I initiated the final phase of my plan. With a single call to my lawyers, I authorized the release of the Luxembourg documents. These papers didn't just challenge the legality of their takeover. They revealed the careful orchestration of their betrayal, documented in their own words through years of emails and meeting minutes. The effect was devastating. By evening, the board had called an emergency session. Victoria and Marcus weren't invited. 3 hours later, Sarah Chen called with the news. The board has voted to rescind the leadership changes. They're asking you to return and stabilize the company. But I wasn't finished yet. As Victoria and Marcus were being stripped of their positions, my team in the Cayman Islands was preparing the final revelation, detailed records of the offshore accounts where I'd secured the true wealth of our empire. While they had plotted their takeover, I had been quietly moving assets, protecting the fortune they thought they were seizing. The last call of the day came from Robert Sterling. It's over, he said simply. Victoria's lawyers are reaching out to discuss divorce terms. Marcus has resigned from all positions and left the country. The board is in full retreat. I stood at my hotel window, watching the sun set over Monte Carlo. In just 48 hours, I had taken back everything they thought they had stolen. But the victory felt hollow. The woman I had loved, the empire we had built together, the trust I had placed in both of them, none of that could be restored. My phone buzzed one final time. A message from Victoria. I never meant for it to end this way. I thought about our first meeting in Chicago, about all the dreams we had shared, about the moment it all started to unravel. Finally, I typed a response. It ended the moment you forgot who built this empire. Then I turned off my phone and ordered a bottle of the 82 Lafite, my favorite wine, the one Marcus had always used to toast our successes. Tomorrow, I would begin rebuilding my empire, stronger and wiser than before. But tonight, I would drink to the lesson they had learned too late. Never underestimate the man who built everything from nothing. Because he's the only one who knows where all the foundations lie. The aftermath of a corporate war is never clean. In the weeks following my counterattack, I watched from my restored office as the empire I'd built transformed once again. But this time, the transformation was on my terms. Victoria's lawyers reached out first, attempting to negotiate a settlement that would preserve some of her dignity, and more importantly, her access to our fortune. They arrived at my office with thick folders of proposals, each one carefully crafted to appear generous while actually seeking to protect her interests. Mrs. Maxwell is prepared to step away quietly, her lead attorney began, sliding a document across my desk. In exchange for a reasonable settlement and agreement to keep certain matters private. I let the folder sit untouched, instead reaching into my briefcase for my own documents. Before we discuss terms, I said, you should review these. I handed them the complete records of our offshore accounts, or rather, the lack thereof. The color drained from their faces as they realized the truth. The fortune Victoria thought she was negotiating for didn't exist, at least not in any way she could access. This is impossible, one lawyer muttered, flipping through the pages. The company valuation was based on assets I controlled through separate entities, I explained calmly. Entities that were never actually part of Maxwell Hotels International. Your client attempted to seize an empty shell. They left my office looking shell-shocked. Within hours, Victoria's settlement demands became significantly more modest. Marcus had already fled to Europe, but his departure hadn't protected him from the consequences of his actions. My legal team had prepared a comprehensive case documenting his role in the attempted takeover. The threat of criminal charges was enough to ensure his permanent disappearance from the hospitality industry. The board members who had supported their coup were next. One by one, they were quietly asked to resign. Those who resisted found themselves facing detailed investigations into their roles in the attempted hostile takeover. Most chose to leave quietly, their reputations only slightly tarnished rather than completely destroyed. Sarah Chen was promoted to global CFO, her loyalty during the crisis rewarded with the position she truly deserved. Marco became executive vice president of operations, his decades of faithful service finally receiving proper recognition. I surrounded myself with people who had proven their worth not through ambition, but through integrity. The media narrative shifted dramatically. Maxwell's masterful defense became the new story, with business schools already requesting interviews for case studies on corporate resilience. The same publications that had once celebrated Victoria's business acumen now analyzed how she had catastrophically underestimated her husband. Our stock price not only recovered, but soared, as investors gained confidence in the company's new, streamlined leadership structure. The luxury brands that had suspended their partnerships rushed to renew their contracts, now dealing directly with me rather than through Victoria's complex web of relationships. One morning, about a month after, the dust had settled. I arrived at the Grand Maxwell to find Victoria waiting in the lobby. She had lost weight, her designer outfit hanging slightly loose, her usual perfect composure showing cracks around the edges. "James," she said softly, taking a step toward me. "Can we talk? Just once, privately?" I led her to what had once been our private dining room, now converted back to a corporate meeting space. She sat across from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Why did you do it?" I asked, the question that had haunted me through this entire ordeal. She was quiet for a long moment. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," she finally said. "Marcus convinced me that you were holding the company back, that we needed to evolve beyond your traditional approach. It started as just business, strategy, but then you fell in love with him," I finished. She flinched. "I fell in love with the vision he presented, of what the company could become, of who I could be." She looked up at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I never thought you had protected yourself so thoroughly. All those years, those quiet preparations." "I learned early in this business," I said, "that the people closest to you can become your biggest threats. I just never thought you'd prove that lesson, right?" She reached across the table, her hand stopping short of touching mine. "Is there any way to fix this? To save anything of what we built?" I stood up, straightening my jacket. "What we built was already destroyed, Victoria. Not by my counterattack, but by your betrayal. The papers will be delivered to your lawyers today. I think you'll find the terms fair, if not generous." "And Marcus?" she asked, her voice small. "Mr. Bennett has agreed to never work in the hospitality industry again. I suggest you do the same." I left her there in the room where we had once planned our future together. As I walked through my lobby, I nodded to Marco, who had watched the entire scene with discreet concern. "Everything all right, Mr. Maxwell?" he asked. "Everything's exactly as it should be, Marco," I replied. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to remember what really matters." The empire I had built survived its greatest challenge, emerging stronger but fundamentally changed. The naive trust that had characterized its early years was replaced by something more resilient, more secure. Every partnership, every contract, every relationship was now structured with clear protections and explicit consequences. Victoria's final message came by email. "You won, James, completely and totally. I hope it was worth it." I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my company, this time with a foundation built not just on success, but on the hard-earned wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal. Because in the end, she was right. I had won. But the victory wasn't in keeping my empire. The victory was in proving that some things can't be stolen, no matter how clever the theft. Integrity, resilience, and the quiet strength that comes from building something with your own hands. 1 year after the attempted takeover, I stood at the podium of the International Hospitality Awards in Dubai. The spotlight was bright, the audience packed with industry leaders, and the irony was perfect. I was receiving the Lifetime Achievement Award in the very hotel Victoria and Marcus had tried to steal from me. "Success isn't just about building something," I told the crowd. "It's about knowing how to protect it." The audience laughed, well aware of the story behind my words. My very public victory had become legend in the industry, a cautionary tale about underestimating the quiet ones who build empires. Maxwell Hotels International hadn't just survived the crisis, it had thrived. Our stock price had doubled. The corporate structure was streamlined, transparent, and absolutely secure. Every property in our portfolio was performing beyond projections. Sarah Chen, now my trusted CFO, had implemented financial controls that made another takeover attempt impossible. Victoria, I heard, had moved to London. Her divorce settlement, while generous, had left her far from the wealthy woman she'd imagined becoming. Marcus had disappeared to somewhere in South America, his reputation in the industry permanently destroyed. Last I heard, he was trying to rebuild his career in real estate development, with little success. The attempted coup had taught the business world a valuable lesson. Never mistake a builder's quiet focus for weakness. The same patience and attention to detail that had helped me build my empire had also helped me protect it. After my speech, during the reception, Robert Sterling approached me with a knowing smile. "You know what they're calling you now?" he asked, gesturing around the room. "The Phoenix of Hospitality, the man who rose from his own ashes, stronger than ever." He wasn't wrong. The new Maxwell Hotels International was more powerful than before. We'd acquired 3 major properties. In emerging markets, each one more successful than the last. Our management style, once criticized as traditional by Victoria and Marcus, was now praised as foundationally sound by industry experts. Marco, my loyal doorman turned executive VP, had transformed our service standards across all properties. "We're not just selling luxury," he would say in training sessions. "We're selling trust." The same trust I had lost and found again, transformed into a business principle. The offshore accounts that had protected my assets became the foundation for a new expansion fund. We were breaking ground on properties in Singapore, São Paulo, and Mumbai. Each new hotel was structured with ironclad protections, the lessons of betrayal built into their very foundations. That evening in Dubai, after the awards ceremony, I took a moment alone on the hotel's rooftop terrace. Below me stretched the city lights, a testament to ambition and vision. My phone buzzed. A message from Victoria. "Congratulations on the award. You deserved it, all of it." I deleted the message without responding. Some chapters are better left closed. The real victory wasn't in the awards or the stock price or even the restored empire. It was in the knowledge that I had faced the worst kind of betrayal and emerged stronger. That the quiet strength that had built everything from nothing was still there, tempered now by wisdom. They say success is the best revenge. But I had learned something more valuable. Success isn't just about what you build. It's about building it so well that no one can take it from you. As I looked out over Dubai's glittering skyline, I thought about that morning in Monte Carlo when everything seemed lost. The empire I'd built hadn't just survived their betrayal. It had been reborn through it, because sometimes losing everything shows you what you really had all along, the power to build something even greater from the ashes of betrayal. That's the thing about phoenixes. They don't just rise, they soar. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.